Good evening, Facebook friends, citizens of America and the planet. Welcome to tonight's Fireside Chat. We are very honored to have special guests tonight. We're going to be talking about the upcoming Democracy Convention that will be held August 2nd through 6th in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And the title for the Democracy Convention this year is Universalizing Resistance and Democratizing Power. So let me invite you, before we get started, to just like this, share this, because we have a lot of democracy to build, like we have a lot of resistance to build. In this era of Donald Trump, and the bipartisan crisis that we face with the assaults on our jobs, on our wages, on healthcare for profit instead of for people, in the crisis of a generation locked into student debt, endless expanding war, the crisis of police brutality. Democracy is at the core of this problem, and democracy is at the core of our resistance and our uprising. And that's what we'll be doing at the Democracy Convention. Let me invite you right now to just post, how is this assault on democracy impacting your life, and how are you fighting back for democracy in a healthcare system for people, in an education system that actually provides public school, in a system of policing and criminal justice that actually provides justice instead of an assault on our civil liberties and on racial justice, a criminal justice system that is not a system of mass incarceration. So I would love to hear your thoughts about how we take back our democracy in our communities. And that's what we'll be talking about at the Democracy Convention in Minneapolis. And we're going to open with a very special guest, George Martin, who is one of the board members of Liberty Tree, the sponsoring organization, and a leader in the Green Party, one of the founding elders of the party. Before the Green Party, one of the members of the Black Panthers, actually. So George goes back in the defense of democracy for quite some time. So let me welcome George tonight. Thank you so much for being with us, George. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit, how did you come to be involved with the Democracy Convention?
Well, hello, family. Hello to everybody across our wonderful country. And it's a sad state today, but at the same time, as we talk about our democracy, it's about changing things. And I've been involved in this, you can look at me and see all this gray hair, and you can say, oh, that's age, that's old, but that's also wisdom. And I'll tell you, I have had the benefit of working through my lifetime in the civil rights movement, in the women's movement, in the changes in the university in terms of, and also LGBT, the anti-nuclear movement, the peace movement. I'll tell you, this is a tremendous country from the grassroots up. And what we're talking about, our democracy is getting more direct representation in terms of the people of this country and where the people come from, as opposed to the politicians who have their own agenda. So we've been at this a while, and I've had the privilege to work with Ben and Jill and many of us around the country. I'm talking tonight from Newark, New Jersey, where we start our National Green Party annual meeting tomorrow, and so much looking forward to that, because this is where we come together to on the political end in terms of building our party, and at the same time, the Democracy Convention, in terms of its aspect, 10 conventions in one. The bringing together of social movements and the crossing of those intersections so that we can get out of our silos and learn more and support each other. It's absolutely fabulous. I'll tell you, I can go on and on in terms of what we did in 2013 in Madison, Wisconsin, and now we're going to be in Minneapolis coming up at the beginning of August. but it's something to look forward to, and I really encourage anyone who can get to Minneapolis to join the thousands of us who will be convening there to help change our country.
George, can you say a few words? I know that the convention, as you mentioned, is 10 conventions in one, because it brings together the social movements in their many dimensions. So there will be a conference on representative democracy, on voting rights and open government. There will be a conference on racial justice for democracy, on racial equity and justice. There will be a conference on peace and democracy and how we need people power for peace and to stop these endless expanding wars. There will be a conference on media democracy and why we need a free press and how we get a free press for democracy, for example. Do you want to say a few words? You know, Minneapolis is such a hot spot right now for the Black Lives Matter movement, for the protests against the murder of Philando Castile, and then the fact that his assailant, his murderer, was basically let off completely scot-free. Do you want to say a few words about racial justice as a dimension of democracy?
I want to say more than a few words, Jill. It's clear that the FBI has stated that the killing of black people hasn't changed since the Civil War, and we see it in our communities across the country. There is so much in common in terms of racism and use of force, and now we're in the situation with this Republican administration and the Department of Justice saying they take no responsibility in terms of police departments across our country. 8,000 police departments, 8,000 different policies, 8,000 different applications of use of force. And so it can seem to be overwhelming. But for those of us in individual communities, whether it's Minneapolis or whether it's Milwaukee with Dontre Hamilton, and we see it all around, and it's so disheartening. But at the same time, coming together in the democracy convention such as this, and being able to focus on racial justice, and having experts from across this country, not only academic but from the grassroots, coming together to as activists, our tools are education. And that's what this convention is about. It's about education, and it's about connecting, and it's about being able to do better in our individual communities. So as we talk about this convention, I'll tell you, I'm so torn. I'm a leader, nationally, internationally, in terms of the peace movement, the climate movement, and I'm doing workshops on both of those, in both of those sections. But within my heart, there are so many parts of all these 10 conventions that I want to be a part of, that I want to participate in, that I want to be there to learn, that I want to be there to share. So it's a real opportunity to pick and choose those things that hit your heart in terms of your own activism and what you want to do and what you want to learn more about. And I am so forward looking to Minneapolis at the beginning of August.
Thank you so much, George. A quick comment before we bring in Ben Manski. I just want to note that the Black Lives Matter movement in Minneapolis is going to be a part of the Democracy Convention, and in particular on the racial justice conference within the convention. And one of the very active Greens who's well known to us, Samantha Priest-Stimson, will be one of the people sharing the local movement. And there's been such an incredible, powerful uprising in Minneapolis to assert the power of the people, to demand that there be justice for Philando Castile and others, and to demand that there be a police force that is controlled by the community, instead of having the community controlled by the police force. And we'll be hearing about problems, but we'll be sharing solutions at the local level to basically put our democracy back where it should be, at the leadership of the solutions to these problems. So thank you so much, George. We're going to bring in Ben Manski at this point, coming to us from Santa Barbara, California, where he is at the university right now. So Ben, welcome, and give us a few words of background. You've certainly been at the heart of Liberty Tree, the Liberty Tree Foundation for the Democratic Revolution, if I have that title right, from the very beginning. And do you want to just say a few words about your concept of democracy and why it is really at the basis for all of these social struggles?
Well, there has been a building democracy movement in the United States since, I think, at least the 1990s. And of course, there's a long tradition of democratic struggle, of people demanding a say in how we govern ourselves. Going back to the 1960s with SNCC and SDS, and then with the women's movement, going back further with traditions of progressive populism, abolition, suffrage. There's a long democratic tradition in the United States. But I think since the 1990s, especially in this period in which Americans have increasingly come to recognize that we are being governed by transnational capital, by global corporations, and exploited and dominated by them in the same way that they have essentially conquered and dominated other peoples around the world, that we're all in this struggle together globally against corporate capital, and that we need an alternative. And that alternative is something that many people in this society, not everybody, but maybe a majority, sort of believe that we should have. We maybe never had it, but it's a genuine democracy. I think that's why when some people talk about taking back democracy or restoring democracy, I think rationally we know we never had it, but we had this idea that we should have it, that this is supposed to be a democratic society, and that's what people are trying to take back. So the Democracy Convention is a really exciting process, and I really resonated with what George was saying about just how wonderful it is to be there. It's very rare for me, as somebody who has been in the movement since the 1980s, since I was a young child. I'm now in my 40s. I've been at this for a while. To go to a space in which there are hundreds and hundreds of people who you really want to talk with, and there's sessions that you really want to go to, and as George was saying, to learn from. And the reason why the sessions at the convention, I think, are so meaningful is that they're led by people who are doing the work, who are doing the work on the ground. Yeah, there are reporters there, and we love reporters. In fact, just on the phone today with Free Speech Television, which will be live streaming and videoing, and Dennis Traynor and many other folks in the media democracy sector will be there. But they're not just reporters, of course. Those are folks who are also doing the work, right? So what's different about the convention is the journalists who are there are people who build media democracy. They're not just talking heads. It's not just intellectuals who are there to speak from the stage, or politicians, although we will have politicians there. Jill Stein will be there. She's one of our keynote speakers, so I should just make sure that everybody's watching knows that. And also the newly elected chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Mark Pocan, will be speaking as well. So this is it's a nonpartisan event, right? It's basically bringing people together from various political parties. But these are all people who are actually doing the work. Pocan has been a lead sponsor for the Right to Vote Amendment, for the We the People Amendment, for amending our Constitution to make it truly democratic. And so I'm just throwing out various examples of the kinds of people who will be there. They're folks whose ideas come from experience, from practice, from trial and error, and who actually have a stake in the outcome. And so that makes you feel like you're there as part of a community when you're at the convention, as opposed to simply being talked down to by people on the stage, which I think we've seen too much of already this past year.
And in that spirit, let me put on my a lot of feedback. Okay, earbuds. Okay, are you okay now?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So in the spirit of that participation in democracy, I'm going to just read some of the comments here from viewers, and let me encourage you again. How are you, how does the fight for democracy manifest in your life? How are you fighting for democracy in the workplace, in your health care, in your Social Security? What's the nature of the democracy fight for you? Share that with us. And we got shout outs from Patricia Augustine, hi from New Jersey. Mary Eaton, hi from Ashland, Oregon. Brett Anthony Dixon, hello from the Green Party of Alameda County. David Tudor, hello from Denver. Marie Craig, listening from South Carolina. Jarrett Rogers, hello from Tampa. Patricia Augustine says, hi, George, and hi, Jill. Winston Belial says, hope to see you again in Memphis. Data Dow Jones, hi, Jill, this is Data, your buddy from El Paso. Marie Craig, listening in South Carolina. And from Denmark, Joan Aziza Domines saying, I'm looking from Denmark and sharing. And Michael Macgiolo Fadrag says, George, you're brilliant. Jennifer Vickers says, Samantha is amazing. That's Samantha Priest-Stimson in Minneapolis, indeed. And here's a question for you. Joe Capollarello says, candidates are required to have 15% support to qualify for presidential debates. Let's place, for the first time in American history, an honest political party on the debate stage that doesn't accept money from corporations. How about that? Ben, do you want to say a word about how do we move forward democracy and the need for real debate in our elections, in all of them, not just presidential elections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anybody who's been involved in electoral politics for any period of time comes to see how elections actually function in this country, whether it's from the question of who decides who gets to appear and who is heard from in the debate stage, to who appears on the ballot, to how the ballots are actually counted. I've been a candidate in the past. I went through a recount in my first election in 1996. That was eye-opening to discover sort of the role, for example, in that election of an interest group like the Deputy Sheriff's Association and stuffing the ballots, rigging that race. Anybody who has had experience will come to see that. And then the question, of course, becomes what they do with that knowledge. Do they decide to play the game or do they decide to change the rules, right? And for those of us who decide to change the rules around political democracy, around how elections work and to make them more representative and more democratic, we run into a strategic problem over time, which is that the vast majority of American people are not engaged in elections, for many good reasons. And so part of what we're trying to do with the democracy movement and with the democracy convention, in which all these different struggles come together, is to link up work around voting rights and election reform to other democracy struggles that maybe are more meaningful to lots of folks in terms of where we live or where they live. People who are working for democracy on the job, people who are creating cooperatives because they understand that we need economic institutions that are owned and accountable to us. People who are working to democratize their schools, to give students and faculty and the community control and to push back against attempts to get rid of elected school boards, for example, as the Democrats and Republicans have repeatedly tried to do in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and many other cities. We need to link all these democracy struggles together because alone we may win a few battles, but we lose the larger struggle. We've got to win the whole thing. And if we don't, the consequences are no longer just unbearable. They are fatal, as you've pointed out many times, both of you, George and Jill. We are in a climate catastrophe. We can't leave the decisions up to those in power. And so we have to transform all the institutions, whether you're talking about elections or in government or the economic institutions, the cultural institutions in our society. Otherwise, goodbye, right? I'm not ready to say goodbye. I got little kids.
Yeah, exactly. We need to fight for democracy like our lives depend on it. Because of that. Are you getting feedback there? Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
You are? Okay, great. And let me invite... Yeah, just a quick question. Mel, I'm going to suggest that you bring us all on camera, if that's possible. No, you can't do that. All right. So I guess we'll have to transition. George, we'll come to you in a minute. We'll do a couple more. Oh, wait, you are able to do it. Okay. And I want to give a shout out and a big thank you to Mel Figueroa, who is working the tech end for us tonight. So big thank you to Mel, big shout out. And also a big thank you to Elijah Manley, who's also assisting George out in New Jersey tonight. Some of the other speakers, by the way, who will be coming, some of the amazing speakers who will be coming to Democracy Convention also include Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, this intrepid peace warrior who's out there just, working to stop the needless violence all over the world. I actually have the great honor of traveling to Korea with Medea starting next week. We're going to another one of these hotspots just before the Democracy Convention, in fact, so we'll be able to report back on that. Chase Iron Eyes will also be there, who is one of the incredible leaders of the democracy movement within the Standing Rock movement, and is one of the indigenous leaders who's been leading the fight for us all, for human rights, for climate rights, and for just basic democracy and the right to demonstrate, to petition for redress of grievances. We all know these incredible scenes of the abuse of the Standing Rock demonstrators simply for standing up for their tribal rights, for the right to their ancestral lands, for the right to protect their water and the climate, how their rights, their First Amendment rights, were just unbelievably abused with attack dogs and freezing fire hoses in the middle of the winter, and all sorts of tear gas and just unbelievable treatment. Chase Iron Eyes is a true hero for all of us and a hero for democracy, and it's such an honor to have him. Jackie Patterson will also be there, one of the leaders of the against environmental racism, who really helped wake up the broader public to the issues of racism as a basic environmental issue. And Gar Alperovitz will also be there, a name that many people may not be familiar with, but really has been a leader for democratizing our economy, and just very exciting speakers and a wealth of skills, ideas, and experience and solutions to be sharing. So let's try to take one or two more questions here for Ben, and then we'll give George a turn here. So let me see if we have some of these questions here. I'm looking, I'm mostly seeing comments. Umbra Trasido says, I'm just glad anyone is still fighting. Many are just trying to afford medicine for their kids. America is not a fun place for many. Lou Novak says, collecting signatures for marijuana legalization ballot initiative in Michigan, I assume. And Daniel Whitfield, I voted for Bernie in the primaries in 2016, then for Jill Stein in the presidential election. Thank you so much. Ben, let me just turn it over to you to just make a final comment or two before we put George back on camera to make some responses to the comments.
Sure, absolutely. So, Jill, you could have just kept on going and going with Jennifer S Addison from Wisconsin originally. She's now executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. I will say a younger leader, because she's even younger than I am, who is, on the national stage, still radical in every way you could want. And many others. In fact, there are over 150 people who are signed up to lead workshops and sessions. There will also be lots of great music and poetry. So Shahed Buttar will be leading off some of that. We'll also have Emma's Revolution. And on Sunday, there'll be a mass participatory process called the People's Movement Assembly, where we'll be coming together to make some decisions together about action in the coming year. So, I'll use my opportunity to say, if you haven't made your plans to travel to Minneapolis yet, it's not too late. And in fact, as of today, today's the last day that you can get very low cost lodging and food. We have on the university campus. Go to democracyconvention.org. You can find lodging on there. Sign up for the lodging. Register. Our registration is like it's $50 regular, $20 low income student, $100 if you want to contribute a little to help out, with the overall costs. Nobody will be turned away. So if even $20 is too much for you, come anyway, give what you can. But this is something you're not going to want to miss. So please just go to the website, democracyconvention.org. If you have questions, email us. And I certainly look forward to seeing all of you and many of you who are tuned in tonight there in Minnesota.
Thank you so much, Ben. And we'll put George back on. Are you able to hear me? I'm getting a lot of distortion here. Are you able to hear me okay?
You sound great to us, George.
Okay. All right. Terrific. All right. Wonderful. I will just tune out my my earpiece here. So George, any thoughts you want to jump off with? Got lots of comments. People are really excited out there, very excited about standing up.
I'll tell you, this is my third democracy convention, and many of us have worked together a long time. But just tonight, I'm getting more excited about this. More excited in terms of thinking about the people who are coming together, the 10 different conferences, any of the subjects that we've already discussed tonight, we could just go on and on and on with. But we're talking about the democracy of our country. We're talking about reclaiming that. And truly during the last decade, Washington has been stuck on stupid. And the only real democracy has been local democracy, the local democracy movement, which our democracy convention has been a big part of from the local and state level. And we've seen this happen in terms of climate and how states and leaders are rebuking around the world. We've seen this in terms of nuclear weapons in the United Nations. So we come back to this point of working locally and thinking globally. And although we may not have the voice that we have had internationally in terms of our ethic and what's right, we still are in a position to support allies, to begin to, and Jill, I'm so glad you're going to South Korea. And in terms of my international work, it's so important to hear from the local people to get the truth. And you have to go places to get the truth. And with the truth, we can share and we can do a better job. I'm just really excited about August and being in Minneapolis. I just want to mention to people, being in the Midwest, it's more accessible for the whole country. And from the standpoint of economics, Amtrak goes to St. Paul. It doesn't say Minneapolis, but it goes right there. We can carpool through the Midwest. We can come by plane, train, or whatever. But we need to come. We need to get together to change this country.
George, we're getting a lot of comments here about single-payer health care now and what that has to do with democratizing our healthcare system so that it serves people, not profit. But you have a few words to say about healthcare and what that means to health, to democracy, to justice?
It's been clear. It's been clear for many decades. I walked the halls of Washington 35 years ago working for single payer. It's been clear to many of us who understand things that this is the only way to go. The rest of the world has shown us how to do things, but we're stuck with the greed not only of the insurance companies, but the medical systems and the greed of the politicians. And so, I'm in Wisconsin. Why are we paying 4 times more for health care than anybody else in the Midwest? This inconsistency, and we can talk about states' rights or federalism or whatever. It's unfair to the citizens of this country. We all know what's going to make things work, and we have to affect things to change it. And so as we talk about single payer, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to know that a couple years ago, 47,000 Americans died because of the lack of health care. And here we have this administration talking about dropping hundreds of thousands off the roll and off that benefit. It's criminal. And so as we talk about healthcare is a right. And we need to come around that, and we need to support that. And the Democracy Convention, we can find a new way. We need to find new ways to do things.
Great. And in fact, people may have seen the recent Congressional Budget Office study that showed, in fact, that Trump care, which is really wealth care, it's not health care, because it's going to be bad for our health. It will take, in fact, 22 million people off of health care in the next decade. And each year, in fact, there will be something like, I believe it's 28,000 additional deaths from not having health care. The real solution is not going back to Obamacare, because that also is full of holes. And there are tens of thousands of people every year now who die because they don't have health care, or because they're underinsured and they can't afford to use their health care. We need Medicare for all. We need a single payer system. That is what democracy looks like in healthcare. A question here from John McBroom. How to get a free press? Oh, I guess this is a comment, but you can add to this, George. How to get a free press? 1, reinstate the fairness doctrine with updates to apply to today's technology. That means allowing all voices to be heard, basically. Break up the media conglomerates and create an amendment to the fairness doctrine that allocates a 15-minute time slot during election years that would be used to give all candidates free 30-second commercials and ads. Okay, well, that's an interesting proposal, but I think the idea is the public owns the public airwaves. We need to re-democratize our airwaves and take them back, and we need to get the big money out of politics so we can get the people back in. Anything you want to add to that, George?
Oh, there's no question about that, Jill. During the last presidential campaign, what did the media make off of $5 billion off of the airtime promoting certain candidates above other candidates? And we won't even talk about the equity of airtime. Now, that's a huge other situation. So, the balance there has to be changed. Also, as you're talking about the public airwaves, in terms of our local democracy, some way of controlling or getting fair and balanced content. It's horrible. When you travel this earth and you know that people around the world understand current news better than we do in the United States. When you understand that we're getting 2 minutes of filtered news, by drive time, we're getting 5 minutes in a half-hour evening news show, and nobody reads a newspaper as much anymore. So we really have, and I don't want to speak to this, but we really in our country don't have access to the truth as much as the rest of the world does. So this has to change, and it has to change by changing the corporate control. What else can I say? We don't expect to have the truth about the war in Iraq on the Today Show when General Electric is a military contractor and they're the owner of that network. So we things have to change in terms of the structure of the media in our country.
Great. And these are not impossible solutions. These are solutions that are really within arm's reach. These are things that we can do. It's all about our getting together and using the power that we have. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. It's all about knowing that we have it, standing up with the courage of our convictions, and taking back this promise of democracy to create an America and a world that works for all of us. So I want to thank you so much, George Martin. Thank you, Ben Manski. Thank you to Mel. Thank you to Elijah behind the scenes there. And we encourage you all, please come and join us. Thanks, Elijah. Please come and join us in Minneapolis, August 2nd to August 6th. And go to democracyconvention.org and plug in. We look forward to seeing you there, and we'll see you next week on the Green News Network, and very much looking forward to it. We'll also be live streaming, by the way, from the Green Party convention. So tune in early and often, and you'll see power in the making, and join us as part of this green uprising. Thank you all so much. Have a good night. Please like and share, and let's get the word out, because green news is good news. Thanks so much. Take care.